This is Nucleus, the podcast covering America's top leaders in business and culture. I'm your host, Tripwire. Today on our show, how one artist went from illegally hijacking bus shelter advertisements to building a $300 million empire that's taken over the art world. KAWS, the art of building a platform empire. Last month, a massive KAWS sculpture sold at auction for just under $8 million. Not bad for a guy who started his career literally taking advertisements from New York bus shelters, painting cartoon characters on them, and sneaking them back into place. But here's the thing. KAWS didn't just get lucky. Brian Donnelly built a $300 million art empire by doing something most people said was impossible. He made street art credible to museums, while keeping it accessible to teenagers buying $20 Uniqlo t-shirts. And he did it by treating himself like a brand before anyone understood what that meant. If you don't know KAWS, you've definitely seen his work. Those cartoon characters with X's for eyes? That's him. They're on everything, from 40-foot sculptures floating in Hong Kong's harbor to keychains dangling from middle schoolers' backpacks. He's collaborated with Dior, Nike, and Sesame Street. His paintings hang in serious collectors' homes next to actual Warhols. And somehow, he pulled this off without gallery representation, without venture capital, and without anyone really understanding what category he belonged to. Because here's the secret. He didn't fit into a category. He created his own. To understand how KAWS built this empire, you need to go back to Jersey City in the 90s. Brian Donnelly graduates from the School of Visual Arts in 1996 with an illustration degree, and does what lots of art school grads do. He takes a job animating cartoons for Disney. He's working on Doug and Daria, learning character design, making rent. Normal trajectory. Except at night, he's out in Manhattan doing something decidedly not normal. He's opening bus shelter advertisements, removing the posters, taking them home, painting his own characters over Calvin Klein and DKNY ads, then reinstalling them. Technically vandalism, practically genius. Because here's what happened. People started taking these modified ads to collect them. KAWS created scarcity without meaning to. Each piece was unique, temporary, and unauthorized, which made them valuable. But he couldn't capitalize on it. He was anonymous. No way to monetize street cred when nobody knows who you are. So around 1999, he makes a move that changes everything. He relocates to Tokyo. And this is where the story gets interesting, because Japan in the early 2000s had something America didn't: a sophisticated culture around collectible vinyl toys. Companies like Medicom were producing limited edition designer figures that sold for hundreds of dollars and appreciated in value. KAWS walks into this scene and pitches his own character, the Companion. It's basically Mickey Mouse with X's for eyes and a skull and crossbones vibe. Simple, memorable, ownable. The first release sells out immediately, then the second, then the third. And suddenly, KAWS has a business model. He's producing limited vinyl figures that fund his fine art practice. He's building a collector base that'll follow him anywhere. And he's doing it all while maintaining complete creative control, because he owns the intellectual property. He returns to New York in 2006, sets up a studio in Brooklyn, and starts playing both sides of the art world. He's making paintings that sell for six figures while simultaneously dropping $300 vinyl toys. The art establishment doesn't know what to do with him. Is he a serious artist or a merchandise guy? And KAWS just shrugs and says both. Because in his mind, there's no hierarchy. A painting isn't more important than a toy if they both carry the same creative vision. The breakthrough moment comes in 2016, when one of his sculptures, a 16-foot tall companion, appears floating in Hong Kong's Victoria Harbor. It goes massively viral. Millions of people see it on Instagram who've never heard of KAWS. Then, in 2017, he drops a Uniqlo collaboration. The t-shirts sell out globally within hours. Websites crash. And critics say he's sold out, diluted his brand, gone too commercial. Except, 2 years later, one of his paintings sells at Sotheby's for nearly $15 million, 10 times the estimate. So much for selling out. What KAWS figured out, and what most artists miss, is that accessibility and exclusivity aren't opposites. They're complementary. The kid wearing a KAWS Uniqlo shirt becomes aware of the artist. Maybe they buy a print. Maybe they start following the work. Maybe 10 years later, they're bidding on sculptures. Meanwhile, the collector who just spent $2 million on a painting sees their investment validated every time they spot that same visual language on a billboard or a sneaker. Mass exposure doesn't cheapen the brand, it amplifies it. So what can we actually learn from how KAWS built this? 3 specific principles stand out. First, create your category instead of competing in someone else's. When KAWS started, he could have chosen to be a gallery artist or a street artist or a designer. Instead, he refused to choose. He operated simultaneously in fine art, collectibles, and commercial collaborations. This seemed confused to traditionalists, but it was strategically brilliant. He wasn't competing with Jeff Koons for fine art collectors or Supreme for streetwear customers. He created a position where he was the only option. If you wanted KAWS, you had to come to KAWS. This connects to what business strategists call blue ocean strategy. Instead of fighting in crowded markets where everyone's competing on the same terms, you create new market space where competition becomes irrelevant. KAWS did this by dissolving the boundaries between high art and commercial design. The tension between those worlds that critics saw as a weakness was actually his competitive advantage. How do you apply this? Look at the artificial boundaries in your industry. What would happen if you served 2 supposedly incompatible audiences simultaneously? The key is finding authentic connection points, not just straddling markets superficially. KAWS could pull it off because his visual language genuinely worked at every price point and context. Second, build intellectual property that functions as a platform. KAWS created simple, emotionally resonant characters, the companion, BFF, chum, and a signature visual element with those X eyes. Then he deployed them systematically across every medium and price point. A $10 keychain and a $10 million sculpture share the same visual DNA. This consistency created instant recognizability. Whether you encounter his work in a museum or on a t-shirt, you know it's KAWS within seconds. That recognition compounds over time. Each exposure reinforces brand equity. This is platform thinking, creating core IP that generates value across contexts rather than one-off products. Disney does this with Mickey Mouse. KAWS does it with Companion. The discipline required here is harder than it looks. Most artists want to constantly reinvent themselves. KAWS stuck with variations on core themes for 3 decades. That constraint became his strength. For you, the question is whether your core offering can scale and translate. Does it work at low and high price points? In digital and physical form? For mass audiences and connoisseurs? If not, you might not have platform IP. You might just have products. Third, balance scarcity with accessibility strategically. KAWS maintained limited edition collectibles that appreciate in value, while periodically releasing mass-market collaborations that expand his audience. These strategies seem contradictory, but they reinforce each other. Limited vinyl releases build a devoted collector community and secondary market value. When a $300 retail figure resells for $3,000, that creates perceived value and urgency. Meanwhile, accessible Uniqlo releases expand brand awareness globally. Someone in Bangkok who'd never heard of KAWS sees the collaboration, buys a shirt, follows him on Instagram. That mass exposure drives interest back to the collectibles. The key is maintaining brand consistency across tiers. The Uniqlo shirt doesn't feel like a cheap knockoff. It feels like accessible KAWS. The $1 million sculpture doesn't feel different. It feels like premium KAWS. Same visual language, different applications. This connects to what economists call price discrimination capturing consumer surplus across the demand curve by offering products at multiple price points. Airlines do this with first class and economy. KAWS does it with sculptures and t-shirts. You don't have to choose between exclusivity and accessibility if you're smart about timing and positioning. The broader framework here is what Harvard Business Review calls the platform business model. KAWS doesn't just sell art. He built a platform where his visual IP generates value across fine art, collectibles, fashion collaborations, and installations. Each category feeds the others. The museum exhibition drives collectible sales. The Uniqlo collaboration funds ambitious sculptures. The viral Instagram posts from public installations create awareness that drives everything else. It's a flywheel, where each component accelerates the others. So here's what you take from KAWS. First, don't accept the categories your industry hands you. Create your own position at the intersection of supposedly incompatible spaces. Second, build core IP that's simple enough to be instantly recognizable, but flexible enough to work across contexts and price points. Third, serve both mass and premium markets simultaneously with the same brand DNA, using scarcity and accessibility as complementary strategies rather than opposing choices. The bottom line? KAWS proved you don't have to choose between artistic credibility and commercial success, between museums and merchandise, between exclusivity and accessibility. You just have to be disciplined enough to maintain your vision, while smart enough to deploy it everywhere. That's not selling out. That's building a platform. And in 2026, when everyone's talking about the creator economy and artist as brand, remember, a guy with X's for eyes figured this out 25 years ago by taking bus shelter ads in Manhattan. Sometimes the best business strategy looks like vandalism until it's worth $300 million. Thank you for listening to Nucleus. You can show our podcast team some love with 5 stars and a follow. Stay hungry, stay foolish.
Grab news. Thomas.